And we're live. Hey, Kartik.
Hey, Daniel, how are you? Good
Hey,
afternoon.
I'm good. How are you?
Can't complain, man. It's a Monday morning here in Seattle.
Is it raining as always?
Actually, believe it or not, it just finished snowing.
Oh,
So, I
wow.
mean, yeah, nothing to write home about. It's melted already. So, but crazy weather here in the West Coast.
Okay. Well, welcome to everybody who is watching, wherever you are, if it's the morning, the afternoon, the evening, or maybe even at night. We are here to talk about managing Microsoft Power Platform deployments.
hmm
And who are we? Kartik, can you please introduce yourself?
Sure. Yeah, I'm. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and for some of you, good night. Hopefully, you don't go to bed after watching this, but or while watching this. But my name is Kartik Kanakasabasan. I am one of the principal product managers at Microsoft, focusing on developer tools. So, why am I talking about deployment? Well, because when you develop applications, you got to deploy them somewhere. So, that's why I'm working here with Daniel. Go ahead, Daniel.
Yeah. Okay. So my name is Daniel Laskowitz. I'm a Power Platform developer advocate at Microsoft. I have been working at Microsoft for 6 months now. Before that, I was a consultant at a large system integrator, and I used to work with the Power Platform for a very long time now already. Even before it was Power Platform, I believe. First, it was Business Applications Platform, I believe.
Mhm.
I went through all the name changes, etc. But today I'm here to talk about the Power Platform deployment. But we are not the only ones here.
Mhm.
We also have a moderator, and the moderator is Justin Yu. So if you have questions, if you want to say hi to Justin, make sure to leave a comment. And whenever there's a question, we will try to answer it as soon as possible. Justin will do that, but sometimes we will also get a question, and then we'll try to answer that as well.
All
Okay.
right.
So the module is manage Microsoft Power Platform deployment, and it's available at aka.ms/learnlive-2023-0227A. Wow, that's a
That's
mouthful.
a mouthful.
Or you can just scan the QR code. That's also
Yeah,
good.
that's simpler. I'll just take your mobile phone, just take a picture of the QR code, and just go there. That's all.
Yeah, and that's how you can follow along with us.
Mhm.
We will do a lot of talking. We will do some demos. So we'll try to show you as well
Cool.
what this module is all
Well,
about.
I think the audience deserves to know this. The fact that this is going to be the first time in the Learn Live session the roles have been reversed. So this time around, I'm actually going to be just doing the talking, and Daniel is actually going to be doing some of the demos. So it's not going to be me doing the demos this time.
Yeah, I wanted to play as well.
Uh, I'm sorry. You felt left out. I apologize for that feeling.
No worries. Okay, so let's move on.
All right.
Yeah, again, it's live and interactive, so make sure to ask questions if you have some.
Yeah.
Yeah, for the learning objectives, we are going to talk about exploring the Microsoft Power Platform deployment foundation concepts. We'll talk about how to determine technical requirements, about planning your deployment, multi-tenant and multi-instance Dynamics 365 deployments. It says Dynamics 365 deployments, but of course also the Power Platform deployments. We'll talk.
It's the same
Yeah,
infrastructure. Okay.
exactly. We'll talk about managing subscriptions, and that's not all because we have another slide with a couple more learning
Oh yeah,
objectives.
we're not done.
No, we have a lot to cover today. So, determining storage, integration considerations, and managing
Yeah, the
authentication.
last one's my favorite. Because
Yeah,
that's like 90% of the work in any kind of software application in general in the first place.
exactly.
Oh,
Yeah.
all
So, let's
right,
move on and go into
let's
the
do
first
it.
subject.
Let's get into it. All right. So exploring Microsoft Power Platform deployment foundation concept. I mean, that's a mouthful as it is. All right. So what do we generally talk about in this case? So when we look at Power Platform in particular, there's some, and again, some of the foundational concepts we want to look at. One, Power Platform by its nature is about extracting value out of data. All right. So one of the areas that we're going to be covering is looking at how is data accessible to some of these services and what are the considerations that one needs to go put in place. In addition to that, we'll look at some of the key best practices that ought to be in place that you ought to follow. And again, these are guidelines. All right. And then beyond that, the kind of access control considerations that one needs to go have when you're dealing with data in particular. I mean, Daniel, anything else you want to add to that?
Yeah, I think it's good to show the diagram here at least.
Right.
What is in the Power Platform and where does it appear as well?
Mhm.
Because of course, I think I heard somebody once say Dynamics 365 apps are also almost a Power app.
Yeah.
So
No, they
yeah,
are a power app.
it's all built on the Power Platform.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's something that you should realize as well. I see this is
Uh-huh.
a little bit dated because we missed one of the products here, and that's
I
Power
know Power
Pages.
Pages is missing.
Yes,
Yeah.
but
But
yeah,
but I mean that's the crux here, right? So you consume applications through various different surfaces, right?
hmm
You have your Office 65 surface, you have your Dynamics 365 surface, or just any standard web application as such, which is on top, built on top of a common stack in itself, which is in this case Power Platform. But the key thing about this is the fact that when we talk about Power Platform in general, there are two elements here. One is obviously there is Dataverse, that is Power Platform's own inbuilt infrastructure to go store, the security model, everything else is kind of baked in. That's there. Or you can connect to existing data. So one of the things Daniel and I will kind of spend a lot of time talking about is also making sure the fact in order to be productive with Power Platform, you don't have to go ahead and move your data into Power Platform. Your data can reside where it's at, and you will still be able to extract value out of it in that context there from a Power Platform perspective. And these are again, this is the kind of topology that we're talking about when we look at specifically from a Power Platform deployment perspective. Daniel?
yeah, totally agree. And I think it's also good to talk about a little bit about the connectors, for instance, that are
Mm-hmm.
a really big part of the Power Platform. We have more than 900 connectors already to different systems out there, and you can think of SAP, for instance, but also all the Microsoft services that are out there, like SharePoint, like Outlook, Dynamics 365. There's tons of connectors available, and if you have a service that doesn't have a connector, it's getting harder to go there because there's more than 900 already. But whenever you find one, you can also build your own custom connector, for instance, to extend on it. So
Well, we make
it's
it easy. We make it easy for you to go build a connector up. I mean,
exactly,
any connector that's out there that's got an open API spec available, you can easily create a connector. If you don't even have an open API spec, then you can embellish it with an open API spec and then create a connector just on the fly.
yeah.
Excuse me. Sorry. Apologies. All right. So let's start off with the basic here, right? So strategy and vision. So Daniel, why don't you kick us off here?
Yeah, so you should always think about the strategy and vision that you have with a platform, of course, because it's not just building an app, it's building a platform and using the platform as well. And you should totally think about that before you start, because I've seen, and I think Kartik as well has seen some people that are really enthusiastic about the Power Platform and start building, and they find out like a couple months later that they have 1,000 apps that they have no clue about, for instance.
Mm-hmm.
So it's always good to look at how you want to use the Power Platform and how you want to use it maybe in a couple of years.
Yeah.
So not
Well,
just now, think
yeah.
about later too.
But I think you also hit on a good point there, right? At the end of the day, Power Platform is an honest to goodness application development environment. Yes, you now are bringing in non-technical people and having them build applications, which wasn't the case before. But these folks are building applications that are useful to the organization in ways which it speaks to their respective business models. So that's a key thing that one has to understand, is the fact that when we look at the strategy, we're talking about being able to realize value from data faster.
Yeah, yeah, and it's also really vital to look at like the fine balance there, because um, when you start with the Power Platform, it's also really handy to have some examples that you can show, like this is something that worked within a department in our company, for instance. So there's always a fine line you need to balance on, and that's also really important.
Right.
So yeah, we talk about power users, about professional developers, and not everything is going to be fine from the get go.
Yeah.
Sometimes one party goes way faster than the other party, for instance, and that can change, of course. But in this module, we also have the roles and responsibilities. So you should be looking at what kind of roles and responsibilities do you have with the Power Platform. And for instance, also, you should look at establishing a center of excellence. And we're not talking about the center of excellence starter kit yet.
Yep.
It's a center of excellence, the group of people that are going to work with the Power Platform.
Right.
And they usually look at all the stakeholders that are out there. They talk to them. They make sure that the Power Platform is manageable, for instance, etc. So there's tons of things we can talk about with the roles and
Exactly.
responsibilities.
But the obvious question is, well, what constitutes this, center of excellence, right? This could be,
Mhm.
it's usually a constitution. And I don't know out of your experience, you, Daniel, but in my experience, what has made the center of excellence really important is the fact that it's a culmination of citizen developers, code first developers, and IT kind of all working together to kind of figure out what the cohesive strategy is in
Yeah.
being able to build out. That's kind of what the crux of the center of excellence is, because that helps in both adopting, because let's be honest, right? When we talk about low code application development platform, there's a learning curve involved as well. Yes,
Mhm.
less so, but some of us have known how to build applications in a particular way, right? So, for example, if a citizen developer who's an avid macro programmer, well, now introducing a new paradigm, there is a skills piece, and that's where the center of excellence really kind of comes into place to make sure that those skills, there's a body of knowledge that the organization's built. Plus, how does Power Platform be relevant and able to extract value out of data in an effective way for the broader organization? So the kind of things like organization standards and things like that, that's what the center of excellence also puts in play, is not only just going ahead and evangelizing and encouraging usage, but also specifying what the appropriate guardrails need to be in order to accelerate adoption inside an organization as such.
Yeah. So if we look at the next slide, we can also see what kind of parts there are usually in a center of excellence.
Okay.
Because I believe we had
Yep.
we had a slide on that. Yeah, so here you can actually see the whole all the parts there. So it's also about monitoring. It's about business change management. There's all kinds of things in there that the Center of Excellence can do. And I think, and that's my experience at least. I don't know how it's for you, Kartik, but
Mm-hmm.
I've seen a lot of Center of Excellences that also work on reusability, maintainability,
Yep.
that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And that's also hugely important with a low-code platform, of course, because before you know it, you have 1,000 apps with 1,000 menus that are different again.
Exactly.
We all know that for instance, marketing or communication department, they would love to see a more kind of branding in there that they want to
Exactly.
have for every app, for instance.
Well,
And
yeah, I mean, standard theming, standard theming. I mean, think about it this way, right? If there's some organization standards that we end up going ahead and having everyone, whenever they go build their application experience, to go build already stuff that's already there, it's not very productive use of anyone's time,
yeah,
right? What you want to be able to go do is build applications that are engaging and so on and so forth, and not trying to rebuild everything again and again that's already been built before. So, from a center of excellence perspective, that's one of the key things, is you can actually establish a core set of artifacts that are the basic minimum that one can go ahead and incorporate into your solution artifacts before you go ahead and incorporate them into your apps as such. So again, a couple of things. So the COA is not just a body of people that set down rules and everything else. They're actually part of the development and creation process as well.
correct. So the low-code strategy team, yeah, that's that's also, of course, very interesting. So it works really both ways. We already talked a little bit about this, I believe, because we talked a bit about decision makers, etc.,
Right.
stakeholders, and sometimes it goes bottom up to learn all your makers use the Power Platform, for instance. You already talked about learning, Kartik. That's usually a thing that also works bottom up. And top down, well, that's also to make sure that the top layers also know what's in there, of course.
Well, exactly. Exactly. I mean, and what we're talking about in this case is actually, it's kind of a meeting in the middle, if you will. All
Yeah.
right. Because what's going to happen is that there's at the top down level, there's educating some of the executives and saying, okay, hey, this is the spread of applications that you currently have, and this is the kind of ROI that one has. Now, in most organizations, any organization that has actually got a bunch of software projects where taking some of the best developers and working on some of the projects which have minimal ROI is not necessarily good use of those skills. All right. But if you can actually have the business folks come in and build out those applications, you can immediately validate a lot of these things a lot quicker and actually have a better ROI in that, because you're able to identify process efficiencies a lot quicker, remediate them, or say, yep, this is not a useful project. So you can, that's the kind of culture that we're trying to go build. Yes, you want to educate folks from the broader populace at the bottom up level, where people that are actually building applications. At the top down, you have to make sure that the business case still holds up. In the case of a low code, and that's essentially what we're talking about. Is that as part of that COE team, that is also part of their charter to go do this kind of evangelization, if you will, within the org itself.
Yeah. Okay, the key elements of strategy. Yeah, you have multiple teams that you can see here on the screen. Of course, you talk about an administration team where they look at security, for instance, about data loss prevention policies, managing users, capacity, and licensing. But you also have a nurture team, and a nurture team is more about making sure that the people who are building the apps also get a podium to talk about their experiences, for instance. So you can think about a champion program, for instance, app in a day events. I think a lot of people probably that are attending already did that. So app in a day, Power Automate in a day is also a thing. RPA in a day. There's tons of those workshops, and those could be ran by the nurture team as well. And hackathons, of course, making sure that there's mentorship, and a bunch of other things as well. And then another team should be focusing on automation and reusable components to make sure that, for instance, the example I just talked about, that you don't have 1,000 different menus that all do the same thing, but everybody started from scratch instead of using it from, for instance, a component side of thing.
All right, exactly. So, and again, this is all just part of the way we want to roll things out. In particular, uh, um, and again, when you talk about nurture teams in particular, you always want to make it as interactive as possible, right? Uh, it is. I know you and I are just going to embark on wowing all our users, listeners today about with a bunch of PowerPoint slides, but PowerPoint slides honestly only go so far, right?
Exactly.
So you really want to make sure, which is why we're interspersing this particular session with a bunch of demos in the middle as well. But you really want to make sure that people are able to at least get their hands on this a lot quicker and get the experience that they need to get and really acclimatize themselves with that. Oddly enough, if you know how to use, joking aside, if you know how to use PowerPoint, to a large extent, a lot of the makers, citizen makers, would already know how to use Power Apps in particular, because it is essentially like a PowerPoint environment where you're building apps in that context.
Yeah.
Oh, this is my favorite. All right. So, yeah, exactly. So the obvious question comes up as well. Okay, you've given me a great strategy. You've gone ahead and given me, these kind of things to coach you on. Well, what are the type of delivery models that one has, depending on, again, I know Daniel, based on your prior experience as well, you've gone ahead and seen things, in your consulting days, and how these things are also organized. In particular, at least the most that I have gone ahead and seen in my experience has always been on the biz DevOps side. I am going to be partial to my agile community in general. All right, all right. But that's not to say the fact that we don't, being nimble and agile is not necessarily demonstrated in these different type of certain organizations are designed for reaching certain types of outcomes. And all we're trying to say in this case is the delivery model. You can't have a one size fits all paradigm when it comes to adopting any kind of new technology, let alone local application development environment. So we have to look at it exactly that, we have seen success in these different models of being able to go deliver and impart this particular capability to an organization and introduce that new technology as such. So, you want to get into some of the details on the centralized part and decentralized here, Daniel?
Yeah, so it's always also a journey, right? So
Yeah,
not everybody is right at the biz DevOps part.
exactly.
It's also a growth story. So sometimes they start centralized, where yeah, they start with a central team, and then they work from there.
Hmm.
But decentralized is, of course, more like you have some people that are across the organization, maybe an owner per department or per group inside of your organization, for instance. And then you have the matrix model, and that's like the mix. So you still have a centralized part, but you also have a decentralized part, and that's something that I see with a bunch of organizations, actually, that they have a central IT department that is running the Power Platform, for instance, and they still have champions per department, for instance, that will work on that. I think that's a good example of the matrix one.
Hmm.
Yeah, and then biz DevOps is the one where you have teams with multiple experienced people in there, people who are from an IT side of things, but also the business people inside of one big group where they work on app development, and that's
Yeah,
something that is a little bit different from the other side.
yeah. Well, and you're right. You pointed out right. So there's this graduation process that one has, right?
Hmm.
And yes, eventually you want to get to a point where you're rapidly prototyping, rapidly building apps in this context there. But one of the other things about biz DevOps is the fact that it's because as you've gone through your graduation process, you've identified all the appropriate sort of guardrails to go put in place to really turn the dial on the speed and speed of delivery. Now, I'm not saying the fact that, go crazy in the sense because I can tell you there's still a little bit of a method to the madness, so to speak. You don't want to build garbage by just going fast. Excuse me. So those are some of the considerations that one has to go take into consideration while building. All right. You want to
Hmm.
make sure that you're building the right thing that extract the right kind of value that is important to your business in that context when you're building these kind of applications. So your delivery model will start off initially as centralized, as Daniel mentioned, and then graduate to a biz DevOps. Like I said, I'm partial to the biz DevOps side of things just because it's faster. All right, but it does have to have the right set of context in place already put in place to make sure that the right things are getting done instead of just doing the right things. All right, so now let's talk about planning our deployment. All right, so we've talked about the strategy, we've talked about the vision, we've talked about all the COE stuff. Now let's really get into the kind of meat of things. All right, so uh, one of the first things that we want to look at is when we start looking at our deployment. Now you'll always hear this thing about something called as DLP within Power Platform. I come from a school of thought that that's not necessarily what I call DLP, but it's more around data policies. All right, and in order to be able to go do that, before we get into some of the data policy stuff, I'm going to kind of pass it over to you to kind of help us understand exactly what type of admin roles are we talking about here.
Yeah, so normally when you are working with Microsoft services, you have all kinds of different admin roles. You have the global admin role, and that's the one that has the keys to everything.
Yep.
And it's best practice to not have a lot of people with with that role. So
Hmm.
that's why within the Power Platform, for instance, you can use the Dynamics 365 admin and the Microsoft Power Platform admin, and there are some differences between it, because when you look at Dynamics 365 admin, I believe that's for the Power Platform minus Power BI in that
Yep.
case. And what's also a key difference between the Dynamics 365 admin and the Power Platform admin, and I believe that's going to change in the upcoming months. But for now, it's the big change is that when you have the Dynamics 365 admin role, you don't have access to all the data immediately. And
Hmm.
when you have the Microsoft Power Platform admin role, you also have the system admin role in all the environments. And that's why you have immediate access to all the data that's out there. And sometimes you don't want that. So that's why they are also changing that. But yeah, the biggest difference between those two roles is that Power BI is also included in the Power Platform admin role,
Yeah.
and the Dynamics 365 admin role will be only Power Apps, Power Automate. Power Virtual Agents, Power Pages. There's a lot in there.
Yes, yes,
Only.
yes. And the portfolio keeps getting bigger. Now, we also have AI builders, so you have to also watch out for
Yeah,
things like your AI credits as well. So,
exactly.
you've got that as well. You want to spend a little bit of time talking about it. How do you, for those folks, for those Azure folks that have a subscription, all right? How would this work in that kind of context?
Yeah, so when you have a subscription and you have your admins already signed up, for instance, you want to add an environment.
Hmm.
You always have the default environment. That's an environment that everybody has. But sometimes you also want a different environment in there. And then you have to think about, yeah, what kind of roles do I have within an environment? And as you can see on the slide, you have the environment admin, and that's a role that can do all the things inside of the environment. So they can add or remove users or groups. They can provision a dataverse database for the environment. And that's also a key difference. You can have environments with and without dataverse databases in there. And in this case, we're talking about the ones without, because whenever you have a dataverse database inside of your environment, you will have a lot more roles than these two.
Hmm.
But for environment admin, yeah, they can do all kinds of administrative actions. They can provision a database, as I said, view and manage all the resources within the environment. So if you want to see all the Power Apps, all the Power Automate workflows inside of that environment, you can see that as an environment admin. And
Hmm.
they can set data loss prevention policies.
Yeah. Well,
And of course, we have also the environment maker, and that's mostly about the creator of apps or workflows. And that is the person who can create all kinds of things there, and also create a custom connector if they want to, gateways to make sure that they can also connect to on-premises services, etc. So there's that's more the maker side,
right.
but they won't be able to add or remove a user or group from the different roles.
Yeah.
They will be able to remove a user from their app when they own that, but they won't be able to do that for the roles that you have there.
Yeah. Actually, it's funny you said that. It's funny you said that because over the weekend I was explaining to my daughter what environments are in Power Platform. Go figure
Hmm.
why that discussion even happened. I'm not even going to
Yeah,
entertain that.
nice subject.
Yeah, I know, exactly. Exactly. But the way I explained it to her was the fact that when she was growing up, she used to have this little sand pit, little portable
Hmm.
ones. So inside that I being the environment administrator could decide exactly how much sand was in the pit, what shapes that she could play with. And then she was the environment maker where she would make all different kinds of things using all the pieces that were already there in the sand pit. So that was the example that I guess was like, and she got it. She's like,
Yeah,
oh yeah, okay, I get it now. So
yeah,
that's kind of the kind of distinguishing factor in this context. I mean, what exactly that environment is. It's that little area that you can go ahead and play in and do whatever you want. And the admin just goes ahead and sets up the appropriate guardrails where in which you can do things safely.
yeah.
Oh, my favorite.
You have a lot of favorites.
I can't help it. I can't help it. But when we look at all the kind of environments that we were talking about, we actually could, offer plenty. Where we have production type environments, and these are typically this is we generally recommend, and I don't, David, you can also probably embellish from your consulting days as well, right? And when we talk about production environments, this is the long-lived environments where the production instance of your app resides. This is where all the consumers log on, access information, and so on and so forth. This environment is also the environment that is actually connecting to the production data of your application in this context. All right. Now, the next thing that we also have is something called a sandbox. Uh, this is a non-production environment, all right, but it has similar features as the prod environment, all right. But we generally recommend that you use sandbox environments for either developing or testing purposes. For more instance, actually, now that we also have a developer environment, we actually recommend sandbox being there at least for testing purposes, because the developer environment is something that we've just introduced recently as part of our developer plan as well, which allows developers to go ahead and create environments for building applications as such. The only difference being is, unlike production and sandbox, if the developer environment's not being used for 90 days, it can just get reclaimed completely in that context there. All right. Dave, you
Mhm.
want to talk? Daniel, you want to talk about Sorry, I don't know why I keep saying calling Dave, because I was talking to David Jenny this morning.
Yeah, you had a session with David last week,
I
also
know,
on the Ask
exactly,
the Expert.
exactly.
So I
Yeah,
get
I
it.
apologize. I apologize,
No worries.
Daniel. But
Uh,
yes, so you want to talk about Dataverse for Teams?
yeah, before I do that, we have a question.
Oh, we do.
Yeah, from Bayerischer Schweizer,
Yep.
if I can pronounce it all right.
Bayerische
Um,
Schweizer.
yeah. They said this will change. So Power Platform admin will not see data in future anymore. Yeah, that's the case indeed. So the Dynamics 365 admin doesn't have access to the data by default anymore. Let me be very clear about that. You can still get access to the data, but you have to you have to give yourself the admin role inside of those environments to actually see the data. So you're still able to access the data, but it requires an action. So that's the big difference there.
Yep.
And that's going to change for the Power Platform admin as well. So the Power Platform admin will have to give themselves the system admin role when they want to see all the data inside of an environment, for instance. But they won't get it out of the box anymore.
Exactly.
So
That's
it's
a great
yeah.
question.
Yeah, a great question. I
Yeah.
know from my background where I was working on Microsoft 365, for instance, years back. SharePoint had the same thing. They had SharePoint admin, but whenever you were SharePoint admin, you won't have access to all the site collections in that environment. You will still have to go to the admin center and give yourself the rights to do that, of course.
Exactly.
So this is kind of the same.
Mm-hmm. All right.
Yeah, but we were talking about
We were
the
talking about various different types of environments. You want to finish up the
yeah.
table and just so
Yeah,
we can
so
go on to
you
the next slide?
you talked about the developer one.
Yep.
Yeah, and Dataverse for Teams is the one that will get created whenever you, for instance, use an app in Teams. And we have the Dataverse for Teams environments around there. You can even install certain apps from the App Store, and that will provision a Dataverse for Teams environment that you can see in your admin center as well. And of course, we have a trial environment, and that's something that you can use for short term because it only exists for 30 days. And whenever you create one, you can do some trials, and then after that, it will disappear again. You are able to promote it to production, for instance. So whenever you have a trial environment and you want it for longer than the 30 days, you can still promote it to a production environment.
Exactly.
And the last one is the default environment. And that's the environment that's available for everyone. And you can create apps there, create workflows there. And it's also being used for a bunch of integration scenarios. So whenever you are in SharePoint and you create a flow from there, a cloud flow, it will by default create it inside of the default environment, for instance. And there are a bunch of other integration scenarios that will have that as well. So that's about the different types of environments. You can also create an environment through the admin center, for instance. We will show that a little bit later in a demo because we want to demo some stuff as well, of course.
Yeah.
And Kartik, of course, we're going to talk about the Power Platform CLI because
Exactly.
you own that. So that's another way to create an environment. So you can also do it. If you want to create an environment inside of a pipeline or something, you can do that as well. And that's also possible with the Power Platform CLI.
All right. So actually, before we go to that, so what we're seeing here is the fact that these are, again, different examples. So in your experience in the web interface today, drop-down box available there today, or from the command line. If you don't know the type of environments, the command line is a great cheat sheet. All right. All you have to go do is, say pacadmin create and just hit enter, or say pacadmin create help. It'll give you this help text, and within that, there's these type, and you can see all the different types that are available to you to be able to go ahead and create such environments. In addition to that, Daniel, what are the other environment details can we go look for?
Yeah, so whenever we are in the Power Platform Admin Center, we can select an environment, and
Nope. What
this
happened?
is we're not yet there,
Okay.
but we can see the details, and we can edit settings in there. We can change the environment URL if we want to. We can change the security group that's assigned to this environment, and we can also go to the settings, for instance, to change some settings around if we want to.
Mhm.
So that's
Yeah. By the
about
way, I love
the
live sessions because all the gremlins are out right at the same time.
yeah. So let's talk a little bit about the environment
Yeah.
strategies. And this is a slide. It's a lot of text in there, but in the Learn module that we are talking about, there is also a link in there, and that's about defining your own environment strategy. And
Right.
that will give
And
you all the details that you need to
exactly.
define your environment strategy for your company, for instance. So there's tons of subjects in there, and it will really explain the whole thing for how to define it.
And in particular, in my case, this environment strategy is a very critical part, especially when you want to start doing things like application lifecycle management. All right. It is imperative to kind of really have a good idea of exactly what type of environment distribution you want to have. And again, based on the kind of development paradigms that you want to go encourage. So, for example, there may be folks that want to create development environments that are not persistent. All right.
Mm-hmm.
So in that case, they go ahead and build apps, deploy into tests, and then that's it. The environment's gone. And if
Mm-hmm.
they want to rehydrate that environment, they either go pick it up from the UAT and create a new environment, or if they're more code savvy folks, they can persist that into source code. All right, and if the dev environment blows away or gets taken out, they can reinstantiate a net new dev environment and then rehydrate that dev environment from the source code repository. So environment strategies are absolutely critical in the way you want to go ahead and develop and deploy applications specifically in a Power Platform context. All right. So why don't we go
So.
ahead and show them a demo here, Daniel? I got to stop this. This is
Thank
going to
you,
be the
Kartik.
joke. This is going to be the joke going forward.
Yeah, I'm gonna be called Dave the rest of my
I
life.
know,
No?
I know. Yeesh.
Uh, okay, so let's switch to my demo environment. So what I've done, I've already went to the Power Platform Admin Center.
Mhm.
You can go
And it
there
says
through.
Daniel, by the way.
It's Daniel, really. Yeah, yeah. That's also what my name says here.
Yeah,
So,
exactly.
okay. So, when you are at the Power Platform Admin Center, you can go there by going to admin.powerplatform.microsoft.com. And then you end up in this page where you can see some service health, documentation, etc. But when we go to environments, and that's the part where all the environments are. And in here, you can see the environment name. You can see the type, for instance. We already talked about all the different types that we have. So we have a production environment, a developer environment, Microsoft Teams environments, even sandbox environments. There are tons of different environments that you have here. You can also see a region in here. So when you want to have multiple environments in different regions because your company is multinational, you can of course do that as well. You can see who created it and when it was created as well. Also, there's the possibility to see if it's a managed environment or not. We are not going to deep dive on managed environments, but that's what you can see in this environment.
Right.
You can click on New, and that will open the sidebar where you can easily start creating your environment. So what you can do here is, for instance, enter a name, learn live. You can use the region picker for a region, and there are a bunch of regions available. In this case, we're going to use the United States one. For the type, we can also select sandbox, developer, production, and trial. There isn't any for Dataverse for Teams, for instance, because that gets created in a different way. Those get created when you go into Teams and you create an app in there. So that's a different kind of creation story.
Or
But
through the
whenever
command
you
line, or through the command line.
or through the command line. That's a good one as well. Sorry, Kartik,
I'm just
but
saying.
that's one as well. And whenever you want to create one, you can just select trial, for instance. You can even add a purpose. So let's call this a demo one. Um, Remember then when I said about the database that you can have a database or you can have an environment without a database. That's possible through this toggle. So whenever I want to create a database, I have to hit this toggle, and that will create a Dataverse database for me. So that's how easy it is to go to that step. When you hit
And
next,
but by the way,
yep.
just one key thing is that if you're ever going to do things like ALM with your app,
Hmm.
then always make sure that you select to instantiate the database, because what it's actually going and doing is giving the ability to go store your applications in solutions. So just a
Yeah,
a piece of a nugget of wisdom there.
yeah, exactly. Usually, in my experience, a lot of people always create it with a database. So
Yes.
there's yeah, in most cases when you are you have a strategy, etc., for your Power Platform environment, then you will go for the Dataverse version. Um, the next one is about the database. So I selected that we want to add a database here. And that's where we can select a language for our database. We can even change the URL. Whenever I click on the here link here, because whenever I don't click on that, it will just generate a unique domain name. And sometimes that's a domain name that's not really something you can remember. So that's why you sometimes want to enter your custom domain here. We also have a currency here which you can change, and then whenever you hit save, it will create the environment, and that's where it's currently preparing, and it will take a short while until it's completely done. So to also make Kartik happy, we can we
Aw.
we can go to the command line, and
Mhm.
in here we can use the pack admin create command, and I'm going to add help at the end of it, like Kartik already said, and that will show us all the details that we need to add for creating an environment. So what we have here is we can add a name, a region, a type, etc. Into this command, and that will make it possible for us to actually see or create the environment. And what we also have is a command pack org list, and that
Mhm.
will show all the environments. And let's hope that it was fast enough. But this should show
There we go.
a bunch of environments, and also the Learn Live environment is here. So that's the one that we just created inside of the admin center. So that was a short demo on creating an environment and showing like both ways to go through that.
Yeah.
So let's go back to the slides.
All right.
Yeah.
So we've covered the strategy, the center of excellence. All right. The overall concerns and considerations that one needs to go have from an environment standpoint. Now we're going to talk about secure deployments. All right. So, you know, again, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. My prior to coming into Power Platform, I was responsible for data classification and information protection in my prior role in Azure Security. So I do take it. I do want to take it upon myself to kind of let people know when we talk about DLP policies in the context of Power Platform, it's not necessarily DLP. It's actually data policies. All right. Which allow you to go ahead and classify what type of data resources you can go connect. All right. DLP, in the very purest definition, is not only about just data connectivity, but also data exfiltration. All right. So this is not about that. This is more about making sure the fact that we're able to connect to the right set of data sources that are appropriate for us to be able to go build applications with. All right. So I'll hand that over to you now, Daniel.
Yeah, so let's talk a little bit about connector classification.
You got it.
So within a data loss prevention policy or data policy, let's keep Kartik's name here. Data policy. You can have multiple groups. You have a business group, a non-business group, and you have a blocked group. And those groups are available to make sure that you can make sure that certain data doesn't get mixed up. So whenever you have a connector that goes into the business group, that could be Outlook, for instance, and when you have a connector in the non-business group, and that could be Twitter, for instance, if you want to use those two things inside of one Power App or one Power Automate workflow, it will give you an error because it's not compliant with the data policy. And we have another group there, and that's the blocked group. And the blocked group is for almost every connector. There are some that can't be blocked, but most of them are blockable. And that's something that you don't want at all within the data policy. Mm-hmm. So whenever you have a data loss prevention policy and you have all kinds of connectors in business and non-business, and you have some in blocked, and you want to use one of the blocked connectors, you just can't do that. I see we have another question.
Yeah, we have a question again. It says, actually goes back to our environment creation, but the question was around when you go ahead and create an environment with, let's say, a particular currency, can you go ahead and change the currency in the future? So the answer right now, it's not necessarily planned right now for the future, but that's definitely something in our backlog that we're considering.
Okay, good to know. I didn't even know that. So thanks for the question.
Well,
I learned something today.
Yeah, well, it's in the backlog. I mean, we're still going to go through our semester planning and everything else, and then kind of make people aware of exactly what we're doing. But it is definitely, we've heard that feedback a lot.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Strategies for creating these data policies.
Yeah, all right. Now,
this is an eye chart. This is an eye chart here again. But the intent here is that, excuse me, you not only create different. Sorry, I'm actually nursing a cough over the weekend. So if you notice I'm coughing once in a while, it's because I'm on the mend, just FYI. But it's just, I caught something over the weekend, and I'm still recovering from it. All right. But anyway, so when we start talking about things like our data policies, we need to be able to understand exactly whether or not these policies are only on a per environment basis, or do they span multiple environments. So for example, you may have a policy that says this particular data policy is relevant only for production and QA, because that's where the real, turnkey stuff happens. But in a dev environment, you may be a little bit more permissive, as the case may be. In some cases, like for example, within Microsoft, I'll give you an example. Our laptops are absolutely fine because we're able to go do things, install applications and such. But we also, when we're accessing, let's say, Microsoft specific data sources, we have to have a separate laptop. It's called a SAW that we have to go use. Similar kind of context applies here too, in that nature, about what we have here. Likewise, you can create, different types of permissive policies depending on the kind of data sources you want to go access. All right. Now, the admins of those environments can go ahead and, again, categorize things, and also not only just for out-of-the-box connectors, but even custom connectors as well. All right. So that's the other thing that you can also go look at, is saying, okay, by merely classifying just connectors itself, you are going and presenting a policy saying these are the connectors that are good for the organization, and these are the connectors that we don't care. So you will never have a situation where excuse me, someone ends up building an app that starts putting out data into, let's say, Dropbox as an example. And by the way, we do have a connector for Dropbox.
And for Box, and for tons of other things.
Yeah.
And OneDrive. Exactly. And there's a lot of file storage there.
Absolutely. So, Daniel, I'm going to hand it over to you to go do a demo on the whole data policy aspect of things.
Yeah. Okay. So we are back in my Power Platform Admin Center environment. And I already went to policies and data policies. So in the left-hand navigation, you see a bunch of things. Data policies is below the policies part. And what you can do here is you can actually click on one existing data loss prevention policy where you can edit them or delete them. but you can also go ahead and create a new policy. So let's do that and go ahead with learn live. Then we see the groups that we talked about. So we have business, non-business, and blocked. And what's really important here to know is that you can also see the default tag here. And that's really important because whenever there's a new connector, and I can currently see that there's 952 connectors already in this environment, but the default tag says that whenever there's a new connector, so when number 953 comes out, it will land in the non-business group. So that's a really good one to know, because you can also set it and change it from non-business to blocked, for instance, or to business if you want to. I won't do that, but that's something that you can do. And I see that there's mostly the companies that I know, they use either non-business or blocked, one of those. They won't put it in business because, of course, it could be that there's a personal storage service that comes out and it lands in business, for instance, and that's something that they don't want. But blocked can be also a little bit too permissive in that case. So that's something that you also should have a process for. So whenever there's a new connector, you should see, or at least look at the connector and see, well, is this a business, a non-business, or a block connector? So you should always have some kind of process where you can see all the new connectors and then decide whether it's one of the three groups. In here, when you see the connectors here, there's a bunch of things that you have here. You can see the blockable column, and that says, well, if it's a no, you can, of course, not put it in the blocked group. If it says yes, you can put it in the blocked group. So in this case, if we, oh, sorry, let's do it again. Learn live. Oh, it needs to load it again. But whenever you want to block the Office 365 users connector, you can't do that, but you can block the Power Apps for Makers one. And if you want to change it to business, you can just select it and click on Move to Business, and then it will end up in the business group. And that's how you can actually do that for all 951 connectors, and create your data policy there.
Yeah.
We are not going to go through all of them, so this is what we don't want to do everything. But there is something that I also wanted to show you, and let's see if I can find it, because you can configure also the actions, and that's something that a lot of people have been asking for as well. And the reason why I'm opening Twitter in this case is that I had a lot of customers that wanted to allow the Twitter connector, but they want to remove all the posting parts there. So they wanted to use it for marketing, for searching for tweets, for instance, with a certain hashtag. And those kinds of things were also possible, because you have the search tweets here. And if that's that one is allowed and the rest is not allowed, then you can still use the Twitter connector. There's also a setting here where you can say, well, I want to block all the new connector actions. So that's kind of the same as the default action. You can kind of say, well, I want to have the new actions, I want to block them. Let's go to the next part. You can also add a connector pattern for custom connectors. That's also relatively new, but that's something where you can, for instance, enable certain custom connectors. And the most important one, which we talked about earlier, is the scope. So what you can say here is, I want this data policy to apply to all the environments. I want to apply it to multiple environments. And whenever you select that, you can see already that there's a new step in the wizard here, and that's environments. And that's where you can select which environments you want to apply this one to, and you also have exclude certain environments. So whenever you have, for instance, a policy that you want to apply to all the environments around there except a couple, that's when you want to use the exclude certain environments one. For now, we are going to use the add multiple environments one, and I'm going to scroll down. Oh, hold on. Did we already see it? Oh, I don't see the learn live yet, but let me just select one and add it to the policy, and that's how you can see that you added this environment to the policy.
Yeah, it's the live demo gremlins again.
Yeah, again. So whenever you do this and you want to add it to multiple environments, of course you can do this again, and then add multiple environments to that policy. And then when you hit next, you can review the whole policy, and you can click on create policy if you want to create it. So that's basically how you go through creating a new policy. We went through it really quickly, but I hope this shows a little bit about how you can use these policies.
Right. All right.
So let's move back to
let's
the
go
slides.
to the next stage. What are some of the other things that we need to consider about, when we go into some of these kinds. So now the big one that always comes up is storage requirements. All right. So, for example, when you look at storage requirements in particular, all right, what are some of the considerations that one needs to go look at? Are we looking at per user, per license, per app, or per user licensing? Is that which one is cost effective? What kind of capacity one needs to go add, for either pages or for AI builder, and then so things like, for example, when you do want to add more capacity, there are three particular dimensions that one needs to look at. It's database, files, and logs. All right. So what should I go do to be able to go do to increase when I do want to add capacity? What's the metric should I use to increase the additional storage size, as the case may be, when my application needs increase? So, you want to start kick us off here, Daniel, before I add my color commentary here?
Yeah. Yeah. So there's multiple types of capacity. You have the database, the file, and the log capacities. They all have a different type of cost also applied to it. So the file storage is way cheaper than the database storage, for instance. And that's something that, it gets pulled across a tenant. So whenever you buy a license from the Microsoft licensing, you get a certain amount, and it all gets pulled. So whenever we have like 10,000 people in our tenant, 10,000 times the amount that they get for their license will get pulled into the tenant. So you usually have a lot of license a lot of capacity. But you can run into issues, and I believe there's also some things that you can enable to, for instance, clean up the log files, that kind of thing. There are some settings for that, so please be aware of that as well, because that will help you, manage your capacity. Yeah.
And if you refer to the Learn document on that, you'll find the fact that it says the database size and the file size are usually similar. The log size is usually smaller, and so you can follow that same pattern in your org as well. But that's essentially, if you go to the actual storage capacity page on the Learn side, it actually has a breakdown, a sample breakdown of exactly how you should go ahead and apportion storage to these three different categories of artifacts in this context. All right, so there we go.
Yeah, this is the one where we the add-ons. So whenever you run out of storage, you can ask for you can buy extra storage, and you can do that per gigabyte. So whenever you want an extra gigabyte, you can order that, and it's even possible to have 30 terabytes of storage.
Yeah.
So that's a lot.
It is. It's quite extensive, and again, this is also specifically in the fact that if you also bring your data and store it in Dataverse, all right, that's probably when you're looking at going beyond 1 gig. But bottom line is, if you're keeping data, things like on Azure SQL and things like that, and only for your app that you're actually hosting things in Power Platform, 1 GB is plenty enough in that context. Unless you're also writing very complex flows and complex AI builder models and so on and so forth, and obviously you got to make the appropriate allocation. But
Yeah.
by and large, if the data is where it's at and you're just building Power Platform applications, 1 GB is usually more than enough to get you going and get started. All right. So, how do you identify where exactly? I mean, how much storage is being used across all the instances within a tenant? Well, we have a very simple answer for that. It's if you go to the Power Platform Admin Center, and within the capacity tab, you can now go ahead, and we've actually now provided reports where you can see the usage of both the database, the files, and the logs right there itself across all the different environments in that context. And you can also double click on that particular environment and actually see some of the changes in that context there. I mean, Daniel, do we have a demo for this or no?
No, we don't.
Oh, we don't.
I can probably do it, but let's not
All right,
change
all
it
right.
around.
Exactly.
I don't think if
I know
it's yeah,
we've been having wonderful luck with the gremlins this morning. So,
yeah,
all right, yeah. Well, there we go. Now the really fancy stuff comes in, which is authentication. All right, how do you handle all the different types of authentication that we currently have when we go do that? So far, as you can see where we are in our journey, we've identified the strategy, the vision, the various different environment strategies that we want to go have. How do you want to make sure that deployments are secure, right? And then now we're going to look at how we do the authentication part. This is the part where the application has to talk to the back end system where the data may reside in this context there. All right. So why don't you kick us off here again, Daniel?
yeah. So yeah, you can have multiple types of authentication and identity. So you can have the cloud identity, and that's like the standard one that you have within your Microsoft 365 environment, and it's for user accounts that only live in Microsoft 365. You can also have a synchronized identity, so then you still have an on-premises directory. So you can have your Active Directory on a server somewhere, and you can sync that to Microsoft 365. And then you also have the federated identity, and that's again for the on-premises Active Directory. But there is a difference in the signing single sign-on, for instance, that you have with the federated identity.
Right. And that's a very key difference here between synchronized identity and federated identity is the fact that with synchronized identity, you still have two different username password objects. It's just that they're getting synchronized on a regular basis. Whereas federated identity is that the fact that the identity is getting federated. So in this case, the user object and password object remain in one particular directory, but you're now federating it together. But so you have that single sign-on experience. So that is the very subtle difference between what synchronized identity is and versus when we talk about federated identity in this case. All right. So M365 identity and Azure Active Directory. Well, this is standard, right? When you go in, this is what we currently use as part of our default cloud directory in this context. All right. So when you are an M365 user, when you're an office, if you're an office tenant, you can use your M365 identity, which in turn is hosted on Azure AD. It is still an Azure AD identity. All right. So by and large, anything that's an Azure AD identity, you can now use that identity to log on and build applications, or for that matter, consume applications from Power Platform in that context as well. Now, cloud authentication. So if you don't have an existing Azure Active Directory Active Directory on premise, you have several options, and you can again use different providers to go ahead and interact, authenticate with M365 in that context. So bottom line is similar to what we said before, but you now have that cloud authentication option as well if you do not have an on-prem piece. And again, the requirement here is your systems may also be domain joined, but they all have Azure Active Directory authentication. So that's all you're going ahead and doing. All right.
Yeah, so the cloud only one. Yeah, we already talked a little bit about that.
Exactly.
You manage your user account inside of Microsoft 365 only, so you don't have a on-premises use directory. and yeah, that's something that you can do with Azure AD, of course, and you can manage all the details that you want inside of that. And yeah, I think the next one that we have
is this is the simple, on premise and single. So this is again the whole single sign on piece.
yeah.
All right. Especially now when you look at specifically federating, all right, with an author in this case, enable one thing we always recommend is again enable the password hash, all right, so for a single sign on. But this is what happens when you go ahead and do the federated identity in this context there, all right. But this is what we're talking about for what it's worth in this case. All right, now we have the pass-through authentication. All right, so this is simple password. And this is the difference between the synchronized. So sorry, I misspoke. I apologize. The previous slide was all about synchronized password because that's where you either use the password hash. This is the pass-through authentication with seamless single sign-on, which is the federated identity piece. All right, so that was the difference. Your password hash is used when you're using synchronized identities. All right, your pass-through authentication is used when you're using federated identities. All right, so my bad. I apologize. All right, Danny, you want to add anything onto this one here?
No, I think we can move on to the single sign-on one.
All right,
because
so here's the topology diagram. All right, so here we've got the Azure Active Directory in the cloud. All right, we've got the Contoso CorpNet here, and they've also got their on-prem Azure AD infrastructure as it is, and they're using Azure AD Connect to go ahead and synchronize their identity between on-prem Azure and our Azure AD instance in the cloud. So when the user signs in from a domain joined machine, all right, they're now able to go ahead and I think, and that's the key thing here is the fact that in this case, your machine has to be domain joined with your on-prem AD instance. All right. If it's not, then it's not it won't actually allow you to do single sign-on in this context.
Yeah, and if we look at single sign-on, why do we really want this? It's a lot nicer for a user to have single sign-on, right? No login screens anymore, that kind of thing.
Yeah, exactly. All right. So key benefits of all the stuff you have, the user experience is one, great because it's single sign-on. I don't have to keep remembering passwords every single time saying, hey, what is my cloud password versus what's my on-prem password? So that's great. And it's easier to deploy and administer as well. All right. And it's okay to either use both the password hash synchronization or the password authentication in this context. All right. And so let's go on next. Okay. So this is the other part there too. Okay. This is, I know a lot of us know this is, we have to go ahead and we still have to go put this into the picture. I mean, Dave, why don't you go ahead and provide us some context of why we're laughing about this?
Well, yeah, you can hold on.
Mm-hmm.
So this is this is the one with the Azure AD Connect.
Yep.
Which you can use to sync it to the cloud, and that will be used to make sure that you actually use the Azure AD for the authentication there. Yeah, and it's the whole SSO thing. Yeah, it helps a lot with the user experience there.
Right.
And yeah, we can talk a little bit about the different the different text that is in there, but I think it's good for people to actually read on that whenever they are working through this Learn module. It's something that we can talk on forever. But I think that we are kind of running out of time, so we probably need to move on forward.
Exactly.
We got a question
there too. Go ahead.
So the Bayerische Schweizer again, he asked, or he or she asked, are you planning on connecting Windows Hello or Fingerprint to log in?
That Windows Hello it should already work if you're using
Yeah.
Azure AD and fingerprint also, because you can through
Yeah, I think so.
Microsoft Authentic from through the MSAL library. That should be already there. We can probably have a discussion offline if that's not working today.
Yeah, it should work.
Yeah, because I know it works because I've tried it on my machine. The typical "it works on my machine" excuse. Sorry, no, I didn't mean to
Yeah.
say it that way, but the fact is the Microsoft authentication library MSAL allows for that kind of support. So you should be able to either use your hello features to authenticate directly there. If that's not happening, please let us know. We'll reach out to you offline and we'll figure out how to see what's going on here.
Okay, so let's move on.
All right.
Yeah,
So
I
just
think
just a couple of things to consider. Again, we're not going to go and read out the bullet points here because you probably can read it yourself. But the key thing is when you do go to this particular, direct instance in your learn live session, all right, or the learn session, please make sure to kind of take time to read this, because authentication is usually where 90% of the user experience kind of could fall flat. So you want to make sure you do the right thing from an authentication standpoint, and at the same time, also making sure the fact that it also impacts the way you access your different data resources on-prem or in the cloud. So please spend the time in this section to at least make sure that you understand what are some of the authentication ramifications that one has to go keep in mind. Here we are. We're obviously talking mostly about Microsoft technology, but let's say you federate with other types of identity providers and this, that, and the other, depending on your organization. Azure AD does work with all different types of other identity federating solutions out there as well. So please take the time to understand the concepts of authentication when you do roll out Power Platform in your environment.
and I think this is the same one. There's a lot of content in the Learn module. So if you want to learn more about the federations part, for instance, there's a link here, and it's also in the Learn module that will give you a tutorial around federation, for instance. So if you want to try it out, you can do that with the tutorial. So let's move on to the next one.
I know we're running short of time. There's a lot of ground to cover here.
Yeah.
So, and by the way, we just for grins and giggles, we do support conditional access. So if you're using Azure AD and conditional access, we have the ability. And that is, for example, if there are things like you don't want someone to access an app if their machine is not domain joined, as an example. Or for that matter, let's say that someone's trying to access a Power App for an organization, but their mobile device is not managed. All right. Yeah. Those are the kind of things, those are the kind of use cases where conditional access can really come into play. And by nature of the fact that because Azure Power Platform conforms to the Azure AD authentication paradigm, that is also inherited by just the fact that it's available now within Azure AD. So Power Platform just honors that as is.
Yeah, so a big scenario I always see with our customers is when they want people to access the app only when they are on a company network, for instance, with VPN, etc. enabled. That's when you can use conditional access for that as well.
Yeah, exactly. So here's like a very simple thing, and this is also, by the way, this here is also one of the reasons why I usually recommend that when you're using things like your CI/CD pipelines and so on and so forth, that you use service principals instead of username and password, because typically with username and password, you have things like MFA, multi-factor authentication, right? So if the person's logging in from a device that is not known, that you want to give them to make sure that they are who they say they are before they get access to company data and so on and so forth. So again, that's kind of what we're talking about from a conditional access perspective. Okay. All right, connecting to backend data sources. Yeah. All right, Daniel.
Yeah. Wait. So there are some differences here. We are going to talk about connecting to Microsoft Dataverse, but we are also going to talk about connecting to different data sources as well. So Microsoft Dataverse is, of course, the database plus that is in the Power Platform. So it's a native experience within the Power Platform, and that also makes it way easier to see. If you look at the next slide, there's an image where you can actually see that it talks to Dataverse, and it doesn't have to go through a bunch of loops, for instance.
Right.
So like if you look at other things, they have to authenticate and do all kinds of extra things to make sure that it gets the data. And we'll show that image later on. But Dataverse is like really, really simple here because it's a native experience.
And I do want to impress upon the fact when we talk about Dataverse in particular, under the covers, Dataverse is kind of like a low-code abstraction of a bunch of Azure resources, right?
Mm-hmm.
So think about the fact that when you want to go build an application, you have to have a SQL Server instance, identity, and all this other stuff. Dataverse is kind of our low-code abstraction on top of that. So as you're using Dataverse, you are actually using Azure resources on the covers. You are using Azure SQL. You're using Azure AD. Everything under the cover. It's just that it's abstracted in that context. So it's not just only storage. It's a bunch of other things that are also baked into Dataverse as such.
No, I always call it Database Plus because it's kind of it hits the spot at people, but it's still not really doing it justice. That's
exactly. Dataverse is so much more.
Yeah.
All right. Now this is kind of where Daniel and I have spent a lot of our time is making sure that we're connecting to non Dataverse sources. All right. So in this case, Power Platform uses custom connectors and connectors to connect to data sources that are not in Dataverse. All right. Now, I know in this architecture diagram, we're talking about using things like Power Apps RP, which is the Power Apps resource provider. So think about it this way. When you're deploying your Power Platform application or applications, the infrastructure is you have Dataverse, and then you have various different resource providers on top of it, just like the way it is in Azure. All right. So when we talk about the Power Apps RP, that's what it is. It's some of the APIs are available there. Now, going forward, and this work that's currently that's being delivered eventually will be coming out GA soon later this year, where some of these connection information that used to now be inside the resource provider are now going to be just part of Dataverse itself. So obviously, we'll have to redo the learn session once that feature is available. But going forward, that's the direction that we're trying to head towards. The reason why this slide is actually important is because when you use things like connection references, that's the reason. All right. You have your connection data, your connector data stored inside Dataverse, but the connection information is stored inside RP. Now, what is the difference between a connector and a connection? You might ask, Daniel. All right.
Yeah.
A connector in this case is the ability to connect to a data source. The connection is the profile or the authentication profile that I'm using to connect to that data source. All right. And in this context, that's the key importance. So a connection reference was to make sure that the connector instance in Dataverse is connecting to the right connection to connect to the backend data source itself. Now, if that hasn't confused you enough, I'm sorry.
Yeah, but it's highly interesting because a lot of people they just use this and they are like they take it for granted. But there's a lot of things that's moving behind this, and that's something that you see also on the next slide.
Exactly.
Because that's also in the Learn module, and I would really encourage you to look at that Learn module as well to see all these different steps, because there are a bunch of steps actually in that image that you just saw that are really, really interesting to know about what's in there. There's API management in there, for instance, that that we use to talk to the connectors, for instance.
Yep.
And that's something that's also really interesting to take a look at.
Right. And again, one of the things you'll notice is just like in the prior diagram, I'll just actually go back here quickly. All right. But actually not that I went far back here. But one of the things you'll look at, it says API hub. All right.
Yeah.
That is the underlying infrastructure where a lot of the connection details are stored. Not everything else, but it lets you know what kind of profile that is to be able to go and communicate to the backend API in this case, where the data may be residing.
Yeah.
Now, the reason why this whole connection discussion was important. So, if you were going to ask me, Daniel, hey, Karthik, why did you spend time talking about the difference between connector and connection? All right. Well, it's because when you authenticate data sources, there are two types of things. So let's say you and I've gone ahead and built an application. All right. Now, what happens in this case is I have two types of way of authenticating to a backend system. One is the explicit authentication. All right. The other one is implicit. So when I share an app with you, and when you open up that app, the system's going to say, hey, there's an access to this application, access to particular data sources. please provide your connection to me. Now that whole story is an explicit authentication. So what's actually happening is that you're still accessing the same data source, but with your credentials. All right. Now, an implicit application authentication is I go ahead and share my app, you launch that app, but you're using my credentials to access the backend data source. All right. So if I have more access to tables than let's say you would, well, guess what? Now you get to see all the data that I have access to. All right. But that's the key difference between implicit and explicit authentication in this context. So one thing to also understand is preferably at most possible cases, use explicit. One of the things that we're currently working on is service principal support, where it could do things like user impersonation. So that actually secures a lot of the implicit authentication. There's also something that we're currently working on, something called a secure implicit authentication that is only on a per app basis. So it scopes it down even more. All right. So it's not to see the entire environment gets access to it. But there are things that we're doing to go further secure the implicit authentication type scenarios.
Is the secure implicit authentication something like a managed identity, or?
No, it's not managed identity.
No?
It's not yet.
Not yet.
We'll definitely get there.
I'm still hoping for that one.
I hear you.
Yeah. Okay, so I think it's time to start with the knowledge check. So let's see if people didn't fall asleep.
I know. It's been what, 80 minutes now?
Yeah, so I think it's good to point out that people can go to the polls site, and that's where they
QR code, please.
Yeah,
it'll be easier.
Well, it's a pretty short URL, aka.ms/polls, and if you go there, you will be able to vote.
Yep.
And yeah, for the first question, Kartik.
So which of the following is an authentication process that enables a user to access multiple systems or services through a single set of credentials? All right. Is it administrative roles? Do I have to have an administrative role to access multiple systems? Or is it a non-interactive user or a service principal? Is it C, single sign-on? Or D, do I have to go require something called as a multi-factor authentication? So again, the crux of the question is, what type of authentication process do I need to access multiple systems with a single set of credentials? So the answer is single sign-on. All right, C.
Yeah, and I see that 66.67%. So we're very specific here.
There we go.
Got it all right. So
awesome.
Yeah.
All right. Now, our second question: which of the following statements is true regarding DLP policies? All right. A business and non-business connectors can be used together. Business and non-business connectors can't be used together. Microsoft owns standard connectors and Dataverse connectors can be marked as blocked. Users are only licensed to access one instance on the tenant. So again, the question here is, which of the following statement is true regarding DLP policies?
Yeah. So there's a lot of lies on this.
There are plenty of lies.
Yeah.
You know?
all lies.
Exactly.
No, except one.
Except one.
Yeah.
And that's what's not a lie is B. All right. Business and non-business connectors can't be used together. All right. There's a reason for that. The reason why you classify something as non-business is because you don't want that to be interfering with your business application. All right. When would you use a sandbox environment? All right. When recovering an environment, to make changes to an environment without affecting users, to grant security group access, to schedule updates.
Yeah. What do you think?
Well, so I typically do it a couple of reasons. All right. One, if I want to test things out without actually impacting my production users. Sorry, I just gave a big hint. I apologize. All right. Wow. But that's usually when I try to go use sandbox environments. Recovering not necessarily, because if again you can use it. Or if let's say before again, and it's kind of similar to B, but if I'm going to add a new group before adding it to production, I'll see what the impact of that new group is in a sandbox environment before doing something of that sort. And likewise, if I want to schedule an update, I will probably update the sandbox first and see what the ramification of the update is on the sandbox before I update production. So you can see where all the where the answers are all gravitating towards.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yeah. Yeah, and
And
I believe
obviously,
everybody did it right.
there you
Everybody
go.
did it right.
I wonder why.
No. It was. I saw some right answers come in before you actually dropped the hint.
Oh, is that right? Okay.
Yeah. So that was pretty good.
Oh, all right. All right. So I think that is the level of questioning that we'll probably end up doing. But again, we covered a lot of ground here, Daniel, don't you think? I mean, besides me
Yeah.
calling you Dave every once in a while, I apologize again for that. All right.
I believe somebody said Dave Laskowitz, so maybe I should rename myself.
No. Daniel is a wonderful name. Right? But we talked about some very foundational concepts. We looked at some of the technical requirements that you need to go, plan out your deployment in this context. Looking at the different types of tenancy requirements, managing subscriptions, and also looking at all the different storage considerations, integration considerations, and last but not least, the authentication components of making sure that you can actually build robust and productive applications using Microsoft Power Platform in this context. I mean, anything else you want to add here, Daniel, besides everything that we've said so far?
Yeah, we have done a lot. I think that it's good to highlight that we didn't cover everything in there. Some of the slides we went through really fast, but make sure to just reference that part of the Learn module and go there to actually go through all those details to learn about it, because it's really interesting. But because of timing reasons, and we had like 60 something slides, we needed to cut some of it a bit short. So make sure to look at that later if you want to learn more. And that's, I believe, the next slide as well. The link to the module. So if you haven't yet, make sure to scan the QR code and go there go to their reference material. And then I believe we also have a next slide about the whole series that we have. With all the low-code February Learn Live shows. If you want to watch those, we did one 2 weeks ago, which was a lot of fun as well.
Exactly.
And that was something that you can also see. So make sure to go there as well. And with that, we are at the end.
All right, folks. Thank you. And for those of you where it's late in the night, thank you for hanging out with us for so late. And those of you it's late in the evening, or again, thank you. Afternoon. I know you guys have to get back to work, so thank you for that as well. And for those who might like myself, this morning, I have to get back to work as well. All right, but have a wonderful day, wonderful evening, and good night to folks. Thank you.